more, let's bring in Leslie Sanchez and Joel Payne. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist.
And as many of you know, Joel is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Leslie, President Trump, as you well know, and we've already talked about a little bit tonight, stayed on the sidelines, which seemed to suit Glenn Youngkin just fine. But that's changed in the closing hours. To me, that looks like Youngkin has calculated, well, former President Trump really can't hurt me, and President Trump has calculated, hey, Youngkin might win. I need to get on some of that credit. What's your take?
I think you're very good reading of the tea leaves, Major. Very much. If there's an opportunity for President Trump to do a victory lap, we know he will not miss that. What's interesting about it, he had his conference call, his kind of virtual rally that he did with Virginia voters, with his supporters, of which Youngkin was too busy to attend. There is going to continue to be that distance because certainly with the Youngkin campaign, you're seeing that while that support was important during the primary, he spent a significant amount of time and energy distancing himself to not have that pall over his campaign of the Trump legacy. And it has proved to be very effective so far.
Well, Joel, President Biden's approval ratings, as you know, have been falling as Democrats struggle to pass a social and climate spending bill, an infrastructure bill. How much do national politics influence the local or state races that we're watching tonight?
Well, Elaine, it depends on what we're talking about. So Virginia is very sensitive to national politics because it's within right across the river from Washington, D.C. You're talking about those sleepy communities in Northern Virginia. I don't believe that President Biden's struggles of late have necessarily been an anchor on Terry McAuliffe, but I do think it has not been the type of buoy, the type of lift that he would have wanted. And I think, obviously, if the McAuliffe campaign and others on the ballot today had their druthers, you'd rather have more wind at your back with a stronger president. But I think what we're going to see tonight is local issues actually taking the center stage. The Youngkin campaign has been very bullish and very aggressive in putting up front this education issue related to a debate answer that Terry McAuliffe made a couple of weeks ago. I think that issue probably plays a little bit more significant than what's going on with the Build Back Better agenda. I'm not sure if many voters are going to the ballot in Virginia tonight thinking about all the consternation in Washington, D.C. I think more of them are thinking about what's going on in their communities and what's more tangible. And I think those local issues probably have more efficacy.
So, Leslie, from your perspective, because Joel brought up the issue of schools/education, it is writ large across this governor's race in Virginia. We don't want to oversimplify because it's not universal for every motivated Republican voter. For some, it's about what is being taught and how about race. For some, it's about transgender issues. For some, it's just a proxy for bureaucrats either are not paying enough attention to me or telling me what my child will learn without really listening to my feedback. In general, what has been your perspective as this issue has gained traction and become a net positive for Republicans when that has not always been the case?
Well, the key part about what you're saying there is what we're seeing, and a lot of people have been talking about it, is this culture war and how it's activated many of these Republicans. What I like to point to is that this is something that happens every decade. And speaking to Joel's point where he's saying that it is local issues, it's not just that it's a local issue in Virginia, in sleepy bedroom communities, that it is at the core of what activates a social conservative base, and particularly socially conservative women. It's something you saw with the Equal Rights Amendment going back to the 1970s, which was the first time you saw this kind of consortium of conservative women coming out for elections. You saw it in school choice fights. You certainly used to continue to see it on abortion fights. What's different about this is it's not just a single issue. It's a deeper kind of doctrine issue of how parents feel their children are going to be educated. And that is a massive wave that is coming, that is impacting not only the Democrats, but it's certainly uplifting Republicans.
You know, Joel, across the country, Americans are paying more for things like gas, food, and clothing. In fact, my producer, Ari Mont, pulled up some numbers. So a year ago, the national average, according to AAA, for a gallon of gas was $2.13. Now that is $3.40. And in the state of Virginia, Joel, it was a year ago, $2.05, now $3.29. So that's up in Virginia, some 60%. Inflation looks like it's going to be with us a lot longer than the White House has indicated. So how does the economic outlook play not just into Virginia, but beyond Virginia as well?
Well, Elaine, look, if you're the in party, meaning if you're the party in power, you own it. Whether or not it's your fault, if it's happening on your watch, you own it. And I think the president and I think his allies are certainly paying a price for that. Just framing to Virginia for a moment, if you look at these two candidates and you look at Terry McAuliffe and Glenn Youngkin, who do voters think of as the incumbent? Terry McAuliffe is not the incumbent, but he is a former governor, and he is in the party of the current governor. So I think that incumbency baggage goes to him. And when you talk about the dissatisfaction around some of these issues, whether it's gas prices, whether it's inflationary concerns, whether or not they're legitimate or not, those are all going to be absorbed by Terry McAuliffe. And so I get the sense that, if you're Terry McAuliffe, you want to make this a binary choice. You want to hang Donald Trump around Glenn Youngkin's neck, and you want to make voters make that choice about, you want to go backwards to what you just voted against 11 months ago, or do you want to, go forward? And I think that's what you want to make it about. And I think if you're Glenn Youngkin, you want to muddy the waters a little bit more. You want to talk about Terry McAuliffe as a relic, and you want to talk about Terry McAuliffe as being in with the folks that you're frustrated with right now. And that's the political positioning that we're looking at as we go down the stretch here. It's going to be close. Let's not forget, Terry McAuliffe only won this state in 2013 by less than 3 points. The one name I'd also bring up here, Elaine, that people should remember, Princess Blanding. She's the third party candidate in Virginia. And what we've seen actually is reports that Republicans have actually been pushing a lot of African-American voters. She is an African-American woman. They've been pushing African-American voters towards her to try to, again, muddy the waters a bit and take away more available voters from Terry McAuliffe. So that's the positioning that we're looking at down the stretch in Virginia.
Leslie, Republicans have made it pretty clear that they intend to capitalize on messaging around inflation. They've been doing this for months, and they've watched President Biden struggle with not only to explain why it's happening, but what he can do specifically to address it. But what happens if next year inflation concerns begin to recede and President Biden proves to be correct, saying, really it's about the pandemic and supply chain issues, and once those get under control, inflation will come down? Are Republicans essentially shackling themselves to something that they might not be able to control and may not be as potent an issue come the midterms next year?
The interesting part of that question, Major, is that it's an interesting part and an effective one now, right? And whether it is effective and necessary, if it toggles up to the top of mind of voters, that's going to be something. Those are campaign decisions made kind of in the moment. What's true about the voter sentiment right now? Many voters believe this is going to be a long downturn in terms of the economic impact of inflation. You have Youngkin closing arguments saying he wants to eliminate the grocery tax in Virginia, and it's consistently top of mind for all those reasons of higher prices. As long as this is seen as a pocketbook issue, Republicans feel it's it's stronger ground. They tend to be stronger in those favorables. The only thing that's flipped in this case, and I'll go back to education again, it wasn't, under George W. Bush, you saw Bush reach above the 50% favorable line on education and believe it was like the first time in 50 years. It's not really a stronghold for Republicans, but you're seeing when you match it with culture and when you match those pocketbook issues, you have a stream of independent and conservatives that want to come to the polls for Republican candidates.
Well, Joel, history is not on the side of Democrats when it comes to the midterms. So what lessons should Democrats be taking, you think, from the few elections across the country so far?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about when you say history on the side of the Democrats or not. If you look at recent history in Virginia, Democrats have grown their margins in Virginia. It was a +4 state for President Obama against Mitt Romney in 12, +5 for Hillary Clinton in 16, +10 for Joe Biden in 2020. So that certainly would trend towards, again, there are more available voters for Terry McAuliffe to win tonight. Yes, the momentum is with Glenn Youngkin, but there's still more available voters for Terry McAuliffe. And so there's a natural advantage and an inherent advantage when you're looking at that. But you're right. There are political headwinds that you face when you're the in party, like I was just discussing, that your voters are going to hold you accountable for. And I think certainly Terry McAuliffe is trying to divorce himself from some of that baggage. And we'll see if voters penalize him for that, or if voters decide that he's different from the rest of the folks that they might be frustrated with.
Joel, can I ask you a question that is not necessarily top of mind in the conversation about this Virginia governor's race, but I wonder if you have any thoughts about it. And it's not a pejorative question, I hope, but covered the 2016 campaign, and one of the things that was a problem for Hillary Clinton was something described generally, though not a lot of specifics behind it, Clinton fatigue. And I wonder if, for better or for worse, Terry McAuliffe is a representative of that Clinton faction of the party, of Clinton Democrats, and that there is maybe some fatigue or familiarity with him that doesn't work for him in this race and has been sort of a drag from the very beginning. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think that's a fair question, Major, but I'd actually call it McAuliffe fatigue, not Clinton fatigue, because again, he is a former governor, which, yes, there's an advantage in terms of name ID, but Virginians typically like fresh voices. They like new faces. They like new leaders. That's why they have a new governor every 4 years. They don't have multiple terms back to back. So I'd actually call it McAuliffe fatigue. And look, some people I've talked to on the ground do think that Terry McAuliffe, having the big personality that he does sometimes cut both ways. I don't know if that's necessarily a Bill and Hillary Clinton thing. I don't know if most voters going to the polls tonight in Virginia are thinking about Bill and Hillary Clinton, but I do think they are thinking about this is a retread. That's not meant again as a pejorative. That's literally, he's a retread. He is somebody that already had in this office, and I think that is maybe the point that you're getting to there, Major.
Leslie, can I ask you one more before we let you both go?
Yeah.
Did you want to say something, Leslie? I'm just curious about Glenn Youngkin. Go ahead, Leslie, and then I'll ask you my question. Go ahead.
No, very quickly. I completely agree with the idea of the Clinton. I would call it the Clinton fatigue as well. If you talk to voters in Virginia, many of them have their own history with McAuliffe. Many of them see them as a former party fundraiser who was tied at the hip with Hillary Clinton, and did a lot of her big fundraising, party leadership. And that baggage is the one that is probably the biggest advantage just starting out when you match these two candidates together.
I was going to ask Leslie, in terms of assessing Glenn Youngkin and his campaign and the way in which he has tried to thread that needle of embracing those supporters of former President Trump while not necessarily embracing the former president himself. Leslie, I don't know if you're still with us or your picture froze there for just a moment.
I am.
Give us your evaluation of what you have seen as a Republican running in 2021 in this current atmosphere where we know that the former president is not popular in the state of Virginia. Is the kind of campaign that Glenn Youngkin has run something that can be duplicated in other parts of the country?
That's going to be the big question for tonight. There are many aspects that can. Running on this cultural issue, riding that wave, I wouldn't necessarily say that he invented it, but he's certainly taking advantage of it. And these cultural movements come about every 10 years. This is the movement right now, and it's a deep sentiment in the country. It will spill over into the presidential election. That is something. He was a fresh face in terms of politics. That bodes very well for both sides of the aisle. Democrats have done very well in that situation in the past. It's going to have to be somebody who, we like those reformers. We like those types of candidates who are not mirrored in Washington politics. And I believe you will continue to see that on both sides of the aisle. Worked very effectively. And this tonight, if it's a Virginia victory, will do tremendous amounts of recruiting many of those candidates to the right side.
For those of you keeping track at home, that's only one frozen video shop, and we're only an hour and a half in, so we're way, way, way ahead of schedule, folks. Leslie Sanchez and Joel Payne, thank you very much.